These are 22 crew members who boarded a ship their own company knew had structural problems, and not one of them ever came home. The MV Stellar Daisy holds a grim record as the largest vessel by gross tonnage ever lost at sea. And the chain of decisions that put her on the ocean floor stretches back more than a decade before she sank. Decisions that would ultimately land CEO Kim Won-jung in prison for 3 years. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries built a supertanker called Sunrise III at their Nagasaki shipyard, delivering her on July 2, 1993. Nearly 322 meters separated her bow from her stern, making her one of the biggest ships afloat. Purpose-built for crude oil transport with a single hull design that served the industry well through the 90s. MARPOL regulations eventually forced single-hull tankers into early retirement, and that decision turned her entire future upside down. Busan-based Polaris Shipping, operating out of South Korea, recognized an opportunity that hundreds of millions of dollars in Chinese iron ore demand made impossible to ignore. 4 aging tankers entered their fleet in 2006, Sunrise III among them, and within 2 years she arrived at COSCO Zhoushan Shipyard in China for a complete internal overhaul. Workers stripped out the tanker configuration and installed 10 dry cargo holds with a combined capacity exceeding 141,000 cubic meters. They sliced open the main deck for cargo hatches, reinforced bottom plating for heavy ore loads, and repurposed side tanks into ballast chambers. Roughly 6,000 tons of new steel went into the job. This conversion approach contrasted sharply with Vale's purpose-built ValeMax vessels designed specifically for iron ore transport. January 2009 marked her rebirth as Stellar Daisy, reclassified under the Korean Register of Shipping, an IAX member organization, and Flying Marshall Islands colors. And this is where the story shifts from corporate cost-cutting into something far more troubling. Korean Register reviewed every modification and signed off on the conversion plans, but their entire assessment rested on one assumption: that the original 1993 steel remained at factory condition. 15 years of corrosion, wear, and material fatigue hiding inside that hull went completely unaccounted for. Making matters worse, the newly created wing ballast tanks carried a specific risk that no regulation required anyone to evaluate, because if one flooded while a full cargo of iron ore sat in the holds, the resulting buoyancy loss could take the ship down. The International Maritime Organization's SOLAS convention rules simply did not cover this scenario for converted vessels. Warning signs appeared well before the Final Voyage. Inspectors found cracks at frame number 65 during a 2011 dry docking and called them out of the ordinary. Follow-up dry dock inspections in 2012 and 2015 both failed to trace recurring damage back to its root cause. 2016 brought more structural damage at that same frame, and the Korean Register discovered it, but never passed the information to the Marshall Islands, the country whose flag Stellar Daisy flew. February 2017, just 1 month before disaster struck, Port State Control inspectors in Tianjin flagged 6 deficiencies on the vessel, 2 of them involving watertight doors. None of it stopped her from sailing. March 26, 2017 marked the start of her final voyage, when 260,003 metric tons of iron ore filled her holds at the Vale terminal near Rio de Janeiro. All of it bound for Qingdao, China. 24 crew members worked aboard, 16 Filipinos and 8 South Koreans. 5 days out, at roughly 2:20 p.m. on March 31st, the ship floated approximately 1,700 nautical miles off Uruguay, suspended above an ocean floor more than 3,400 meters deep. A crew member reached for his phone and fired off a KakaoTalk message to Polaris headquarters, reporting water flooding the number 2 port ballast tank and a rapid list to port. Korean sources later noted that first text arrived with almost no typos, while follow-up messages came through riddled with errors, the kind a person sends when the deck beneath them tilts toward the sea. An officer managed to broadcast a distress call, and 3 satellite emergency signals followed in rapid succession. Everything went quiet after that. Jose Cabrahan, an oiler, heard an explosion on deck and fought his way to the bridge. where 9 crewmates already stood wearing life jackets. Through the bridge windows, he watched the horizon swing sideways as water poured in from the port side, and the third officer called Mayday over the VHF radio. Cabrahan threw himself into the ocean, and when he broke the surface, the entire ship had vanished beneath a churning field of bubbles. Less than 5 minutes. That's all it took for the 266,000-ton vessel to disappear beneath the waves. A life raft bobbed 300 meters away with Cabrahan inside, who pulled his exhausted colleague aboard. They searched through the entire night and found no one else alive. 24 hours after the sinking, the cargo ship MV Elpida spotted their flares and pulled them from the water. 22 crew members, 14 Filipinos and 8 South Koreans, disappeared with the ship and were never recovered. 8 vessels and 2 aircraft from Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, and the United States swept across 70 by 100 nautical miles of ocean over 17 days, finding oil slicks, empty lifeboats, and a handful of thermal suits. Not a single body surfaced during the entire operation. Grief turned into action when families organized under the International Stellar Daisy Network and collected over 100,000 petition signatures demanding South Korea fund a deep-sea search. That campaign worked. August 2018 brought approval of $4.3 million from President Moon Jae-in's government. Ocean Infinity deployed their vessel Seabed Constructor from Cape Town in February 2019, sending 4 autonomous underwater vehicles across 1,300 square kilometers of seabed. 72 search hours produced the breakthrough. Sonar picked up the wreckage at 3,461 meters beneath the surface, and the Voyage data recorder came up the same day. One of its 2 chips had cracked, something the UK recovery team called unprecedented, and the second chip surrendered only 7% of its stored data, with no voice recordings from the crew's final moments on either one. If you are finding this story as compelling as I do, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment telling me what part of this case stands out to you the most. The Marshall Islands Maritime Administrator published their 83-page investigation report on April 19, 2019, roughly 750 days after the disaster. Their findings concluded that catastrophic structural failure beginning in the No. 2 port water ballast tank triggered uncontrolled flooding that cascaded through multiple compartments in approximately 5 minutes. While some analysts initially suggested cargo liquefaction as a potential cause, the evidence clearly pointed to structural collapse in the ballast tank system. And this is where it gets worse. 11 of 18 converted ore carriers operated by Polaris showed structural damage once inspectors started examining the fleet. Sister ship Stellar Unicorn reported ballast tank damage while loaded with iron ore off South Africa just days after the sinking and reached the scrapyard by September 2017. Stellar Queen split open in May 2017, with deck fractures measuring 1.5 and 2.5 meters across. South Korean courts first convicted Polaris CEO Kim Won-jung in February 2020. But the sentence landed at 6 months with probation and a company fine of roughly $12,426. Families kept the pressure on. March 2022 arrived just before the 5-year statute of limitations expired, and prosecutors charged Kim, along with 6 others, with negligent manslaughter. February 7, 2024 delivered the verdict families had demanded: 3 years in prison for the CEO, with the court ruling explicitly that he put profits above the safety of the ship. Every converted vessel in the Polaris fleet reached the scrapyard by mid-2024. The era of turning old tankers into ore carriers ended not because regulators acted fast enough, but because 22 people died aboard a ship that multiple inspections, classification reviews, and port state checks all failed to ground. That gap between what the rules covered and what the industry practiced cost 22 families everything. And the 7 years of organized pressure it took those families to reach any meaningful accountability tells you exactly where the system broke down. If you want to hear another story about the legal loophole that allows shipping companies to abandon their vessels in the middle of the ocean without consequences, click the video on screen right now, and I'll see you there.